and speculation where possible. And we also want to try and avoid inflammatory language. In addition to that, we want to acknowledge that we are all systematically taught misinformation about different groups and communities, and we have to actively put in the effort and labor to unlearn this misinformation and its associated biases. We also trust that everyone in this call and event together has come to learn, grow, and share. We trust that people are doing the best that they can, and we also acknowledge that we may be at different stages of learning on this discussion at an individual level. And finally, we are not all experts on this call, and as facilitators particularly, we are not experts. We are only here to help facilitate the process, to convene your voices together, and just like everybody else on the group, we are here to listen and learn. And just as a quick reminder, before we jump into our event, is that please be mindful that this event is being recorded and will be shared on social media and YouTube. So while this is a safe space, just be mindful that as you share your perspectives, your thoughts, and your stories, that these will be available to participants and an audience beyond everyone on this call today. So that was a lot of information to take in, but we hope some of these guidelines will help our discussion today. And now I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Devin, who's going to lead us through an introductory poll that will essentially help us get a better sense of who is on the call, where they're calling in from, and what our collective and individual experiences have been regarding racial justice movements in our regions and our countries. So Devin, over to you.
Hi everyone. So we have a quick poll just to feel out who's on the call. So I'm gonna launch that and you should all see it. Give me like a thumbs up if you can see it, maybe. Yes. Okay, so then just answer those questions. We can give everyone a few minutes and then I'll share once everyone's done so we can all see the results. All right, we're slowly increasing the number of people who are voting.
And so maybe while everyone's putting in their vote, we can kind of go over the questions, which you might have seen in the registration email, just to give a little bit of thought about what we can share kind of later on in the call when we open up for consultation. But we're really wanting to hear from you. What's happening in your region or in your area in terms of racial justice movements? How is youth and feminist leadership essential to this movement? And what are the next steps from here? What can we do to make change to systems and structures as young leaders? So you probably have these questions in front of you in the program that Devin has shared in the chat, and also saw these on the registration email. But just as a reminder, so that when we get to sharing, you have these thoughts and responses to the questions in mind. And I think we're almost done with the poll, Devin. Back to you.
Thank you, Safira. Okay, so we have pretty much everyone has voted, so I'm going to end that and share. Can you all see the results? Cool. So the majority of us are from North America. And then between the ages 18 to 30, racial justice movements have been very prevalent in most of our regions and areas. And most of the racial justice movements that are happening are led by young people. So that's awesome. All right, so I'm gonna stop sharing that and we can move on to our next segment.
Thank you for that, Devin. Really interesting to see the results of the poll and how that potentially has impacted the other questions as well. And most of us on the call seem to be from North America, so that would have an impact about how we feel in terms of racial justice movements in our region and area. So good to know about the dynamics on the call. And now we are going to be moving into the first part of our event on youth leadership, feminism, and reading the reality of racial justice movements, especially in the US, which recently has been home to a catalyst that has propelled a collective racial justice movement globally. Joining us on this panel are Mina Ayazi, Philomena Mukange, and May Lempel. We will be taking questions from the audience. So as our panelists share their thoughts, please feel free to put in your questions in the chat box, and we will try to get to as many questions as possible. But before we start, I'm going to quickly introduce our wonderful panelists. Mina here has several years of experience in organizing diaspora and youth advocates for peace and justice. She is currently the Youth, Peace and Security Advisor at Search for Common Ground, where she supports the children and youth teams programs. Philomena here is currently a founding board member of Freedom Fighters DC. She was born in the Democratic Republic of Congo, is a graduate in psychology from Virginia State, and Philomena is passionate about civil rights and was recently featured on outlets such as CNN and NBC News to speak on what it is like protesting, especially as a woman of color. And May here is a race discourse officer at the US Baha'i Office of Public Affairs. She coordinates the office's collaboration with individuals, organizations, and agencies in the US engaged in public discourse and policy and advocacy directed towards racial justice. So welcome to our wonderful panelists. We are so grateful that you could join us today. And now I'll turn it over to our panelists. Mina, would you like to start us off by speaking to what your experience and perspective has been regarding youth and feminist participation in racial justice movements and how the leadership of young people is essential in this climate?
Sure. Thank you so much, Saida, and to everyone in the CSO for having me here today to talk about this really important topic. I think to help some of our audience members and participants here today that are from abroad and don't know too much about the movement for racial justice, I thought it would be great to give just a very brief crash course of what it is that the Black Lives Matter movement is really fighting for. Since the founding of America, for 400 years, Black people in America have been facing systemic oppression. It went from legitimate slavery to that translated into systemic segregation, that translated into this current phase of police brutality and systemic injustice in so many forms that we can unpack throughout our discussion today. Most recently, the murder of George Floyd, an unarmed Black man by the hands of police, sparked a wave of protests around the country, fighting against the systemic racism and injustice that Black people are facing in the country. And George Floyd's murder came after a wave of other murders against Black people like Ahmaud Arbery and Breonna Taylor, and so many more that were murdered in cold blood simply because of the color of their skin. And so this recent wave of protests that we see, and this recent wave of a surge of activism for the Black Lives Matter movement we're seeing, is not a new thing. It's an intergenerational struggle, and it's something that Black people have been doing and fighting for since the founding of this country and since the beginning of humanity, quite frankly. And right now what we're seeing is just a really new voice that's been given to the movement. Generation Z and this generation of young people are bringing new methods of activism and a new voice to this fight for racial justice. And it's really, really, it's fascinating to see that this current wave has also spilled over globally. We're seeing young people in over 18 countries around the world standing in solidarity with the Black Lives Matter movement And we're also seeing the conversation shift from not just what's happening in the US, but also to issues of racism, systemic injustices, and the implications of white supremacy in contexts all around the world. We're seeing young people in South Africa organize and talk about what it's been like to fight for racial justice in their communities and connect with Black Lives Matter activists out here. Some really interesting, I think, key pieces about this wave of movements right now is that young people are really taking advantage of our new virtual world. A lot of activism is happening through social media and on social media. And I know Philomena and May can talk more about what it's been like using digital activism as a way to mobilize people. But it's something that the racial justice movement hasn't seen and that a lot of social justice movements have never seen. And that's really bringing a new force to this activism. A second really important piece is protection issues. When we look at youth activism around the world, oftentimes young people are at the highest risk of political violence. On top of that, young women are at the highest risk of political violence. And on top of that, it's young Black women and young women of color that are at the highest risk of political violence. Unfortunately, in the US, we're seeing that too. A young Black Lives Matter activist by the name of Toyin Salel was recently murdered. And we're seeing young women face things from sexual violence. I think I might get the statistic wrong, but one of the highest criminal acts of police in the United States is sexual assault and sexual violence. And obviously, it's young women that are bearing the brunt of that. So protection issues are a really big problem when it comes to feminist leadership in racial justice movements. At large, it's almost unfair to not recognize that it is police who are responding to very peaceful protests with more violence and more brutality. There's tear gas that was banned in warfare that's being used against peaceful protesters. Young activists are seeing their phones get tracked by governments and police officers. Social media platforms like TikTok are clamping down on posts for the Black Lives Matter movement. Young people are being arrested. Police are showing up in riot gear. And some activists have lost their eyesight and have left with very serious injuries and have lost their lives from this work. And again, it is young women and young Black women and young women with intersectional identities who are facing a lot of the brunt of this. I think as we're talking today about feminist leadership for racial justice, it's really important to talk about the LGBTQ community. This work is coming during Pride Month, where we're all celebrating intersectional leadership and the LGBTQIA+ community. And it's really important to also recognize that that movement back in the late 1900s was also started and pioneered by young Black activists. What we're seeing is in social movement history in the United States, it's always been young Black activists that have led those movements, but have not been recognized for their really hard work and for sacrificing their lives for social justice in all of its forms. I think this is a really, really critical moment for not just the movement for racial justice, but for young people globally. For those of you who don't know, we have 1.85 billion young people around the world, which is the largest number in human history. And what our generation is really showing is that we're different. We're not going to sit silent. We're not going to let these systems of injustice and racism continue to infiltrate our societies. And we are going to do whatever it takes to end it. I think it's really important to recognize that this frustration is brewing really, really important conversations. And unfortunately, only small levels of change have been coming at it. Leaders in the United States are not responding to this in the way that we would want them to respond to, but it's our generation that's going to continue to push them to do that. Again, this is a really critical moment, and I'm gonna stop talking now, but I hope that gave kind of a brief overview of kind of the larger issues at play, and kind of some of the intersectional issues that we're seeing young people face. And I'm gonna stop talking now and let Philomena and May talk about their really important work on the front lines of this activism.
Thank you for that, Mina. That was incredibly insightful. And now, Philomena, we would love to hear your thoughts and experiences about the current reality in the US and beyond, and what has it been like leading protests on the ground as a young woman of color. Over to you.
Well, thank you guys for being here, and thank you for having me and being willing to have this conversation. First things first, when I want to talk about just the whole movement and the support of my fellow feminists. It's something that's so important and critical, but I do think that is in regards to America, there's some healing to do between us as women, because I marched for the Women's March and I was there, and then the same women that I marched with went around and voted Trump in. So when you talk about feminism, intersectional feminism is really, really critical, because it kind of addresses that although it is good as women that we're coming together, that there is still healing to do within our communities as women. Because there still are conversations that need to be had about the Karens in the community and what they do and their effects, and how they're just as complacent in perpetuating racism systemically as their husbands, as the people that are in the positions of power. So for me, when we talk about that, I think that that's one of the first steps if we're going to talk about moving forward on a global level as feminists, is talking about the healing that still needs to be done, because I know that that hurt me deeply to march with women and to say, these are my women and I'm fighting for them and I'm fighting to break barriers, and we're locked. And then they turn around and they vote someone in that creates a space that completely invalidates me as a Black woman. So I just wanted to start there, because I know for me and a lot of Black activists and a lot of feminists, that's a conversation that we feel was skipped over. And it tends to happen a lot with Black women. We fight for everyone, and then the same people that we're fighting for, once they've used us and our momentum and our strength, toss us. And then we're left to fight for ourselves. And when we look to them and look to our allies, or with people we think are allies, we understand that we were just used. So it's something that I wanted to touch on. But being on the ground is intense. I honestly don't think anyone that's an activist and is out on these grounds has their life anymore. I know I don't. My life is activism every single day, whether I'm on the grounds, whether I'm allocating resources, whether I'm going to help another group out. It's intense. I've cried. I've had fights with my family members. Your whole life turns upside down. My face is everywhere. So it is scary for me a lot of the times. I think because I'm young, that people probably take all of this happening so fast, and I'm probably just so excited about it. But in reality, the moment CNN put my name up there, it made me a target, because I am hope, and hope is the scariest thing that anyone can create for Black people. Because hope is the reason why we're still fighting despite 400 years of oppression. Hope is the reason why our kids are out here in the front lines pushing forward and risking our lives, because we have hope. And anybody that signifies hope, that is a symbol for hope, they want to break down. And we've seen the Ferguson protesters disappear. And that is something that I think about every single day. And Mina spoke on Toyin, and I look like her. That was the death that broke me. Truly, I was out the day that we had to do it was a sit-in at Freedom Plaza in order to get them to defund the police department. Sorry guys, I just try not to get emotional with this, but she looked just like me. She had short hair, just like me. For those, I have short hair. Features, she's Nigerian, I'm Congolese, and she just died. And this is when we talk about us. Yes, it's good that young people are out here and they are protesting and we are making noise and unified in the cause. But another thing that we have to talk about as young people in our generation is that constant need to be a part of something and not understanding what it really is, and that constant need for instant gratification. Because everyone knew who Toyin was because they posted her everywhere. But no one ever took the time to actually help this girl. She openly told everyone she was being abused. She openly told everyone she had no home, she had no safe space. And everyone had empathy. Everyone cared enough about it and felt her story enough to say, hey, your story is so powerful and we appreciate you, we're gonna post you. But that's all we're gonna do. And that right there literally captures the issue within our generation. Yes, it's good that they have all these performative socialistic things that they do, but raising awareness is just the beginning. You raise the awareness, and then you create a space to teach people how they can actually help and be part of the movement. If the only thing you can do because you have your own life and you're trying to maintain your life as a Black person is retweet something, that's okay. Because as Black people, we've been fighting our entire lives. Us being alive, a Black person simply just existing and being alive is them fighting. Because every single day I have to fight. I have to deal with racism. I have to walk into a grocery store and get looked at weird. I have to see someone clutch their purse when I walk in the elevator with them when I'm eating at a nice establishment because I'm Black. And every day I have to decide that I'm going to wake up and I'm going to go into a world that is going to spit on me every single step. But I'm deciding to still be alive, to still keep pushing, to still have goals and dreams despite people taking those hopes away from me. That is Black people fighting every day. So Black people don't owe anybody anything. A Black person can sit at their home and act like this isn't happening, and I'm not going to condemn them. Not because it's not wrong that they're ignoring it, but because honestly, I don't think they can ignore it. I don't think a Black person can really ignore this. They've been doing this their entire lives. There is no escape from us. And that's what people don't understand. That's why it's so exhausting being a Black person, because you don't have an escape. I am Black every day. When I wake up, when I go anywhere, there's no day that I can decide I can take a break from this. And I get that. So if anyone understands what it's like to live in this every day, to live in your trauma every day, it's exhausting. It's extremely exhausting, and we're tired. We are tired. I'm drained, like completely drained on an emotional level. But I think what's always been consistent about my people is the fact that drives us. It drives us to keep pushing. We don't really get tired in the sense we do physically, but we never stop, ever. And for people that are watching that are not in America, please continue holding this country accountable. America is the fakest moral police of this world. They point fingers at everyone and come in and save the day. Most of the time, 99% of the time, if they're helping somewhere, they have their own personal interest in it. But of course, they're going to use the other route of looking like they're saving the day because it looks good for them. And so for so long, we've lived under this facade that America is the moral police, that America is the one doing it right, that they have principles and democracy and all the things that I know as an immigrant I wanted to come here for. And then you come here and you see that the truth is America literally is a legal slave trade. Our Black men, our Black women, our offenses, the war on drugs, all these things that people skip over. An entire war was started just to dismantle our people, and we still have not recovered. And now there's an opioid epidemic, and people are freaking out like, oh my gosh, and there's so much empathy. But when it was in the Black community, there wasn't empathy. We're lazy, we're crackheads. Why is it that a Black person is referred to as a crackhead, but when we discuss a white person or a non-Black person recovering from any type of drug problems, they're an addict. Even the connotations, there's no empathy for Black people, ever. And I honestly think that the only reason we're having this conversation right now and the only reason the whole world is in uproar is because just like the civil rights movement, when people started seeing acts of inhumanity that they couldn't explain in their heads or rationalize, that's when they start paying attention. When you look at George Floyd, there's nothing in that video that you can say makes sense as to why they acted like they did. But that shows how much people have failed us, because it shouldn't have to be a situation where there's literally no basis of justification for the behavior of that violence for you to say, hey, what? There actually may be a problem in America. The cops may be actually brutal and violent, and it's rooted in racism. So when I think about these type of conversations, I tell everybody, it's not coming from a place of hate, but it's coming from a place of truth that everybody has failed us. I was failed early on because I'm a refugee. I had to leave my country and live in a refugee camp. And that's why I have such big love for the UN, because anyone that knows the UN, you know how you have to go through the refugee process. And I lived in Kenya, I lived in Kakuma. I've lived through all of that. And then I come here thinking that this is a safe space for me, and then I come to realize that it's not. So here I am at 22, stuck on where should I go? Because there's really no place I can go that doesn't have racism. It may not be as bad, but it's there. There's no safe space for me. Africa isn't even my country anymore. Chinese are colonizing me. every place in Africa. So I'm honestly, guys, I'm in a place where I don't feel like I can stop being an activist. I can stop protesting, not because, God, I wouldn't love to go back to just what life was like before all of this when I was in my own bubble, but because I realized that if I don't give up this moment, then I don't really know what the future is going to look like. Because if we don't address this now and change it and keep up with it, I don't know if it's ever going to be changed. Because white supremacy and colonialism is so deeply rooted in so many different things. From religion. Religion is even, they even use something that people use to just an outlet of space and spirituality to justify this. So if you don't understand how critical honing this moment really is, it really is critical. These conversations need to be had. They need to be had. People need to be willing to be educated. That's another thing that I always want to say to my people. People need the space to grow and to learn. I hate this cancel culture. I hate it, I hate it, I hate it, because it implies that you have never grown from something that was negative. And that is just not true with any human being. The thoughts I had at 12 years old, of course, may not have been evil and nasty or hateful, but they weren't this developed. I didn't understand myself to that level. I was saying things based off emotions. Most of my opinions were based off emotions. They were not based on actual facts or thoughts. They were based on facts plus my emotions. But I was allowed the space to grow, and I was allowed the space to heal. And that's what we need to do at the end of the day. It's not to say that I'm going to be kumbaya and best friends with someone that used to have opinions of my people that were less than humane. But what I am going to do is understand that I can allow you the space to understand why you were wrong and allow you the space to be on the right side of history. And you need to allow people that space. It can't always be condemning, because no one in this world is perfect. Even me as a leader, of course, I may be viewed other ways, but there are things about me that are imperfect. And I would hate for someone to just invalidate me in my activism just because I had a bad opinion about something. You know, and I'm not condoning things that are like really problematic. Like some things can't change at all and you can't forgive, and that's right. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying that we need to be patient and we need to be kind and we need to be understanding to each other in these type of things, because these conversations are heavy. They are not easy, and people are always going to butt heads, and sometimes people don't know that their views are problematic. I legit didn't believe that. And I was like, how at this age, at 22, 30, 40, can you think this and think it's okay? But some people, that's what they're born into. And if someone is born into something and thinking that that is the norm, it doesn't justify them having that problematic opinion, but it definitely gives you an insight to understanding why it is they think that this is normal. And if you can't even accept that train of thought, then I don't know if you're really trying to move this movement forward and have as many allies as possible. And then last thing I'm going to say is that when you see these activists out here, protect them. Visibility protects people. Unfortunately, it does. When the news, your face is there, and if something happens to me, everyone's gonna wonder what's happening. But there are activists that you will never know, names you will never hear, people that are so intricate to this moving forward that you will never hear about. And those people need to be just as protected as someone who is visible. It needs to be loved. It needs to be cared for. I think it's just, I'm usually very fired up, guys, but it's just like, as a global level, I just really need everybody to get it together. I really do. Because if I'm out here and I'm fighting every day and I'm putting my life on the line and I've given up my entire life, I don't even have a job right now. Like that's how invested I am in this. I couldn't even work anymore because the amount of time and effort and energy that requires this, and having a job that's an hour away, it just wasn't working. These are the type of sacrifices that people are making. These are really the sacrifices that people are making. Young kids are making. A lot of us are broken straight out of college. I graduated at the worst time in the world. But we are out here and we're making these sacrifices. So if you are donating to the funds, if you can give supplies, resources, do your part. Even if your part is just messaging somebody that you know that is an activist and saying, hey, are you okay today? Do you need anything? Do you need a hug? Do you need a talk? Do you need lunch? It's very simple. everybody can't be the person on the front lines, and that's okay, but at least play your role in the ways that you can. That's all I can ask of anybody. Don't ever let anybody condemn you for how you choose to help, because you can only do what you can do. And anybody that does that is divisive and is not for the movement. Anybody that ever shames you is not for the movement, ever. So.
Thank you, Philomena. That was incredibly powerful, and please don't apologize for being passionate. Just thank you for sharing your voice, your soul, and your truth with everyone. We hear you, and we are so grateful that you are here with us. Now, May, we would love to hear your perspective as well about racial discourse in the US and beyond. So over to you, May.
Thank you so much. And thank you to Mina and Philomena for setting the stage. And I'm sorry I have to follow Philomena's passion. You spoke so beautifully. Thank you so much for speaking from the heart and sharing your heart with all of us, really. Thank you. I just want to echo a lot of things that Philomena has already said, and thinking about a lot of the things that we think about in my work is how to expand the participation of people in this movement, that this is something that essentially is going to require us all to take ownership over and us all to be engaged in. And we're so lucky that we benefit from the work of people on the front lines, people like Philomena. But we also need of everyone to take ownership of this. We know that social transformation isn't something that a few people can do on behalf of everyone else. And that if we really want to see justice in our society, it requires universal participation. So that's something we think a lot about in the work that I'm doing, and widening the circle of participation. And of course, we're focused, the conversation is centered around systemic racism, as it should be. But I think uprooting systemic racism is a hard and arduous process that requires long-term commitment to that process. So it requires that people actually commit themselves to that. So it requires that individuals think about the way that they're upholding certain systems, and think about how they are engaging and what's their everyday really decision-making to upholding these systems. And I don't mean to minimize systems to just a few decisions that people make, but the idea that these systems didn't just fall out of the sky, but they were actually crafted specifically to give advantage to some people over others. And at the same time, we have to think about how we are upholding those systems in our everyday lives. I can just speak to the reality of the United States. It's really everyday decision making, where we choose to live, where we're sending our children to school, where we're putting our money. Those are the things that are helping helping uphold certain systems. And I think that we have to think about how we're perpetuating certain patterns of behavior and certain inequalities, and how we can tap out and opt out of supporting those systems. And I think that we're also thinking a lot about, I think that, I focus mostly at the level of discourse, so thinking a lot about a language and thought, and the connection of those things to consciousness and action. And Toni Morrison, who's a famous, a well-known female African-American author, spoke about the idea that sexist and racist language doesn't allow for new knowledge to flourish, or for the interchange of ideas. So we have to think about what is the language that we can use to try to actually see social transformation, to see the elimination of racism, to move beyond these racist systems and patterns of behavior and opinion. I think we're also thinking a lot about, in the United States, we are, the narrative around race in this country is oftentimes ahistoric. It doesn't recognize how we got to this point and where we can go from here. And so I've seen a lot of calls for, sort of a truth and reconciliation movement, to really begin to reconcile with the pain of how we got here and how can we do better. Because we're not teaching that to kids in school. We're raising monuments that help solidify a certain understanding of history. So how do we understand how we got here and where we can go forward? And I think that that's something that as individuals, we can definitely educate ourselves, but we can also engage in others in a process of education, engaging in these difficult conversations with each other that asks of us to really sacrifice some of the elements. People who are have been advantaged by a racist system, it's going to require sacrifice on their part to see a society that actually allows for the benefit and advancement of everyone. I don't want to take up too much time because I know that we want to bring more people into the conversation, but I think those are just a few things that I wanted to share.
Thank you for that, May, and thank you, Philomena and Mina, for providing us insight into your experiences, your perspective, and your work. And just for our members on the call, if you have any questions or comments for the panelists, please feel free to send them in the chat box. We already have a question for our panelists, and that is, how can other people of color do better? How can other people of color be better allies? So question open to all three of you, and please feel free to take the floor.
So I mentioned this in the chat too. It is on us as non-Black people of color and as white people to educate ourselves about how to be better allies. It is not on us to ask our Black brothers and sisters and put the burden on them. Because as Philomena mentioned, they're facing with this on a daily basis. When they wake up, when they go to sleep, it's not on us to ask them, it's on us to teach ourselves, to do better and to be better. There are countless numbers of books, documentaries, articles that you can read to educate yourselves on what it means to do better and be better. And it goes beyond just joining them at a protest to take a photo, right? It goes beyond optical allyship. It goes to you talking with your mom on the couch. It goes to you fighting with your family members when they say something racist. It goes to you to stand up to your Black colleagues at work. It goes for you to stand up to your peers at school. But again, we cannot as allies put the burden on our Black brothers and sisters to teach us how to be better allies.
My biggest thing is, if you really want to be an ally, is learning how to be uncomfortable. That's the biggest thing, because comfort is the reason why we're here. Because we normalized things that should have never been normalized, and we found a way, or they found a way, to create this bubble of comfort that was only comfortable for everybody but Black people. And so be uncomfortable. Learn how to be uncomfortable. Learn how to normalize being out wherever you are and a protester walking by and that becoming the norm. Learn to adjust your daily routines to fit the movement, because that's what's going to remind you every day the time we're in. But the moment that you transition back to your regular lives and you're back to what's comfortable, it's like a slap in the face. Because all of us have to adjust to that. All of us have to, every single day, as I mentioned, Black people have to deal with this. But now that we're in the movement, there are things to remind us every day. And that's why we protest every day nonstop. That's why activists are out there, because we understand the moment that we stop and we allow people to return back to their daily lives and routines, we get erased. And that's what always happens. We always get erased. And we're just tired of that. And so if that means no more brunches, if that means I'm not a pro-looter, like that's not how I protest personally, but I get it and I understand it and I understand the optics of it. And so that's what I'm telling you. As my ally, you need to be comfortable with being uncomfortable, no matter how hard it is for you. And I'm not just talking about that, I'm also talking about really assessing yourself psychologically, because racism is so deep, to the point where it's unconscious for some people. You do things that you don't even understand that are innate and normal to you. They're just part of who you are. Because it's so ingrained in the system of how we live, it hides itself as part of life. So take the time to have real hard conversations with yourself about that. Because I saw an episode of Golden Girls, love Golden Girls, by the way, where Blanche is from the South, and you know she loves Big Daddy, she loves the flag, and she's been walking around with it, and I love Blanche, one of my favorite characters. And she just thinks it's normal. It's a way of life for her. She was just doing what everybody else was doing, how she interacted with people, how that's just what she thought it was. And in that sense, she's completely right. But it was wrong. And there was never ever a conversation about, hey, may this be wrong? Because in order for that conversation to be had and that level of consciousness to even be there, you have to be around people that even see something being wrong. And a lot of the times when you're in your comfortable bubbles, those conversations are being brought up. What you're worried about is maintaining your sense of normalcy because we're already dealing with the pandemic, so everything feels crazy as it is. And what you're trying to do as a human being is survive. And that literally leads you to leeching and touching the things that are most normal to you. But right now, you can't do that. You can obey COVID laws and respect them and social distancing, do all those things. But at the end of the day, you need to remind yourself every single day that there's an active movement going on. So if that means following more pages that talked about activism, if that means having reminders, if that means reading a documentary, starting a documentary, Killer Mike, great documentary on Netflix to watch. If you want to educate yourself, do that. But you have to make that effort yourself to do that. It's not going to be me, the Black woman, asking you if you're reading things. It's not going to be me policing you. It's not, because it's not my job, like Nina said. It's not my job. And the fact that there's even this notion that, and people will ask me, and I understand that it's coming from a good place, but the fact that you have to ask me how to help me and not just take the initiative says a lot about Black people and how serious people take our pain and our problems. Like, I have to convince you to help me. I have to show you that I'm humane enough for you. That's literally always been the energy. And we're just not doing it anymore. And one thing I've been saying to all my Black women everywhere that are watching this, we're done being strong. If you're a Black woman, you know exactly what that means. We're done being the strong ones. We're done being the ones that are always there, the ones that are educating, the ones that are leading conversations. We're not doing that anymore. When we do that and we are having these conversations, it's to create a space of understanding, and that's it. But it's going to be on our court, and because we choose to create that space, not because you need it when you have the capability to go on your phone in a technology age and educate yourself on the things going on around you.
Thank you for that. We have more questions coming in, and I'm going to try to get to as many of them as possible. Another question that has come up is, how has tone policing or making your messaging more palatable affected your outlook and activism on the movement as a whole?
Repeat that.
Sure. So the question is, how has tone policing or making your messaging more palatable affected your activism and outlook on the movement?
You said tone policing?
Yes, like the expectation that your messaging should be more palatable so that it resonates with more people. How has that affected your outlook?
Doesn't affect me because I don't really care for it. I'm gonna say what I'm gonna say, and I'm gonna say it exactly how I'm gonna say it. One thing I'm tired of is being always policed. I've been policed my whole life. How I talk, how I enunciate my words, how I articulate. If I speak a certain way, then I'm being white. If I speak this way, then I'm just a Negro. And it's something I've dealt with, and every Black person has dealt with. We know how to make shift and change for certain things. And the fact that we even have to do that shows the type of oppression that we live in. But for me, I don't do any of that. Of course, I'm mindful of people in sensitive conversations when we're talking about someone like Torian and putting trigger warnings and things like that of that nature. But as far as tone policing, I don't do that to myself because I don't need to. You're gonna get exactly what you're gonna get out of me. And I know my message is clear in what I'm saying, and you can hear it and you can feel me. So whatever way you choose to interpret it, that's just you choosing to interpret it that way. Because when I speak, you can feel me. And you can always feel what I'm saying. So how you can take something that is so real and so raw and turn it into something negative is just, to me, it's just divisive, and I'm not going to entertain it. And that's why I tell all activists, like, we're activists for a cause. I'm not here to be liked by people. What I'm here to do is liberate my people, however may that may come. And when you are in that type of territory, Some people are not always gonna like what I do. Hell, some people don't even like that we want freedom. So I don't even know, it's not something that I even stress myself about. I think at some point before I found myself and my identity as a Black woman, I was very conscious of that. And it's something that I used to think about a lot, and I would shift, code shift and things like that. But now that I went to a HBCU and I was around Black people, Black professionals, and they speak like me and they're in their positions of power, I realized all I had to do is be me. I don't care if that sound, one day I sound super articulate, other days I sound like I'm chilling in the crib. And I'm saying the crib, that's okay. That's me, that's being Black, that's cool. Because the reason why that's just even a conversation is because for so long, being Black was a problem. Things that are basically part of us and are just normal and come with being a Black person were associated with negativity. So we basically had to condense ourselves and mold ourselves to be in a way that's acceptable to white America. But now that we're in a space and want freedom, freedom is also just disregarding all the things that we have learned. And that's when I talk about psychological conversations. We need to undo all these things. There's so many things that we do as Black people to fit in and to survive. And we're not doing that anymore, because at the end of the day, what's gonna happen is a space that's gonna be created for us to simply just be Black people, and that be enough. We don't need to talk like this or talk like this or talk like this. I don't care if someone is from Memphis and has the craziest accent and you can't even understand them. If they are qualified, they better get that damn CEO job. We don't have to shift ourselves. And when I have children, I'm gonna teach them that. You can be you can talk how you talk, and that's fine. You can talk slang, and if someone looks at you different or looks down on you because you are saying slang, baby, that's not somebody that you even need to be worried about. I sound like my mom, but okay, yeah.
Thank you for that. And we have a lot of questions coming in, and we just have less than 10 minutes left, so I'm going to try and get to them quickly. And we have another question for panelists. There has been a lot of conversation about racial inequity in global justice movements and the development sector in particular. So the question is that how can international organizations working on racial and gender equity in the US and around the world center Black women and women of color, both in their external and internal approach?
I guess it starts first and foremost with actually having Black women at the table, as far as the conversation, that it's not something that you're talking about people who aren't even in the room to participate, that you're actually valuing people's experience and you want to include them. And I think that requires removing, it could potentially, I mean, obviously you have Black women from all walks of life, but if you actually want a diversity of perspectives, it requires removing some barriers to entry, I think, where we're always pulling from the same pool of people, people who've had a certain type of experiences that we think are agreeable, maybe a certain educational background or experience at a certain level of development. But I think that we have to value all types of experiences if we actually want to create development that benefits a wide variety of people.
To add on to what May said very quickly, it also takes a level of understanding where within your organization white supremacy or racism exists and breathes. The international development field has a really big white supremacy problem, and we need to start by acknowledging that. We often think of ourselves as these social justice warriors that go abroad and are bringing these cookie cutter solutions to problems going on in other countries, when we ourselves are dealing with that internally in our organization and in our home country and headquarters. I've worked for international organizations. Every single one of them has this problem. And this is not a new problem. And it's just a reflection of the systems that the world has created around white supremacy. And as May mentioned, it goes from the way we recruit people. It goes from including more women, more people of color, more Black people within staff to reflect the diversity of the people that we work with, and also to actively listen to them. It's one thing to have people sitting at the table. It's another thing to take their words into consideration and bring them in as meaningful partners. And third, it's about getting rid of Western exceptionalism. I think this entire conversation in the past month has really shown that the problems that the United States face are grave, and the United States is an active country within conflict, and it always has been. People have always thought of the US as this post-racial or post-conflict society, but it never was. It never went away. White supremacists just went and hid in their holes, and glorious Trump decided to run for office and they came out into the limelight, and now the world's paying attention. So it also takes a level of us as international organizations, when we do go abroad and we do work abroad, is acknowledging our own faults and starting within ourselves before going and teaching other people what is supposedly right versus what is wrong.
Thank you for that, everyone. And just being mindful that we only have a few minutes left for this session. We have a lot more questions coming in, but I'm just going to pose this final question to all our panelists to wrap us up before we move on to our global piece. And the question that has come up is that there are a lot of young people and youth activists on the call today, and they would love to hear from you about how young people can tackle the All Lives Matter mentality, especially amongst older folks outside the US.
Listen, I gave up on All Lives Matter people because they stress me out. Like, it doesn't even make sense what they're saying. But for me, as a Black woman, that's really not my job. That's really not, that job falls on our allies, because some of our allies were once All Lives Matter people, until they really started understanding what it is we were saying. And a lot of the times it gets lost, but the movement is called Black Lives Matter too. And oftentimes we don't talk about that too, because the Black Lives Matter has just become such a household name. But All Lives Matter people always forget that. And that's all I ever have to tell them. We said Black Lives Matter too. And for me, it's just, there's always going to be a group of people that want to be divisive and have their opinions and basically don't view Black people as humans. That's something that I've come to terms with. And for me, I don't waste my efforts or my energy on those people. I leave that to my allies, because that's part of the problem that they need to fix, because they were part of that problem. I didn't create that. So I'm not going to fix that. What I focus on is actually making sure that the same people that hold that mentality, that are in positions of power, can't continue to oppress us with their authority. And that's the only thing that I can do on my part.
I'm going to piggyback off what Philomena said. For all of the non-Black POC people on here, yes, we have faced discrimination. Yes, we have suffered. I grew up as a Muslim in America. I grew up as a brown woman in America. I have suffered and I've dealt with discrimination, but that doesn't mean that I need to go out and say Afghan or Muslim lives matter or all lives matter, right? This movement right now is about Black people. It's about the injustices Black people are facing, and it's not a time to play oppression Olympics. So when something is happening to our communities, we cannot co-opt an entire movement for racial justice when, one, we ourselves face racism within our own communities against Black people, and two, the English vocabulary has so many other words that you can create your own hashtag or movement framing to highlight your own injustice. But right now, this is a moment for us to stand up with our Black brothers and sisters and tell the world that they are suffering, and that suffering needs to end, and the injustices need to end. So it really takes us on our part to figure out how we can do better to dismantle All Lives Matter. And like I said earlier, it goes from talking to our family members at home, to talking to our colleagues, to talking to our coworkers, to talking to everyone, and doing whatever we can do in all parts of life, in all parts of our societies, to actually say that Black lives matter right now, and we need to stand up for all Black lives. And all lives won't matter until Black lives matter.
Period.
Thank you. Go ahead, May.
No, I mean, I don't really have that much more to add. I was really just going to echo what Mina was saying, that this is a very the slogan, Black Lives Matter, it's a very simple slogan that was chosen for a reason. It was chosen simplistically to convey a particular message. And so when people say all lives matter, they're not saying all lives matter. They're saying that Black lives don't matter, actually. And so I think that it's important for people who feel that they're able to have that, and especially if you're not facing acute racism, for you to have that conversation with people who are either willfully ignorant or who are really somehow sincerely not understanding what it is that they're saying, to convey to them why it is we say Black Lives Matter, what we mean exactly, and why all lives matter is not going to get us anywhere but a continuation of the status quo.
Thank you for that. Thank you, May, Mina, and Philomena. We so appreciate all your insight and your perspective on this call, and just for sharing your truth and your voices with us. And just to let you know, we have other questions coming in for all three of you, but we're short of time, unfortunately. But just as a reminder to our members on the call, we will be opening up the floor for questions and comments later on in the event. So you can pose your questions and thoughts then as well. But now we'll be moving on to a more global part of this event where we will be hearing stories from around the world. So I'll be turning over to my co-chair, Safira, to lead us through this session.
Thank you so much, Saida, and to our panelists. This was so wonderful to have a chance to read the reality of what's happening in the US right now. And now we want to open up to hear kind of what's happening in the regions, that this is also a global movement. So I'm going to invite Isma to share a little bit about what's happening in Europe, to kind of read the reality. And we have on the slide, for those who can see the slide, some of the questions that we also want to be thinking about together. So we'll hear a little bit from Europe, some from the Arab region, from South America, and then really open up to everyone on the call if you would like to speak, and also share kind of what is happening for you in your regions around the world, and maybe share some responses to these questions. And maybe even for those of you who are following the chat and seeing the questions that are coming in, we also want to have a conversation together about some of these questions. And our panelists have shared some wonderful thoughts and responses, and we'll hear from the regions. And also I think there is a kind of a collective wisdom too when we kind of explore some of these questions together. So even though we didn't get to all the questions, feel welcome to address them or share some thoughts around what has been posted in the chat. So, but I will hand over to Isma to share a little bit about what's happening in Europe.
Thank you so much. I would say that I'm completely speechless after the great presentations and speech that we all heard. And I was reading the comments, and I'm so happy and proud and actually very honored to be on this panel. I'm just going to introduce myself very briefly so people understand who am I, because I have this complex personality. So I was born and raised in France, which we all know is a very racist country in Europe. But I live in Belgium, and I was raised by Algerian parents who were born and raised during the French colonization. So as you know, we have a very important colonization moment in Europe, and also for Belgium as well, because yesterday it is officially the Independence Day of the Democratic Republic of Congo. And living in Belgium, that was a very important day yesterday for all of us. So I'm the director of the European Youth Network for Sexual and Reproductive Rights. So it's really an honor to be speaking here today. So you all said some great things that I'm not going to repeat at all, that racism, and specifically in Europe, Islamophobia, are the main issues that we're experiencing and struggling against. And what happened in the US a few weeks ago helped us actually stand up and started also advocating against police brutality and supporting our brothers and Black brothers and sisters. So it's really important for me to say it. I'm just going to be talking about Black and people of colors. I'm not going to mention women of colors because of to respect identities. So it's really important for me to say this. So of course, like on a feminist perspective, because I do work in a feminist organization, I'm a strong opinionating feminist myself. I was born and raised in a ghetto. I'm a Muslim woman. I'm a woman of color living in Belgium. So it is a very challenging situation. And I wanted to say that Feminist itself is not intersectional. And that's a huge part of the work that we're doing here, like advocating to have an intersectional approach to feminism, because we're not understanding how deep the issues are. You cannot talk about women's rights when you're not talking about what Black women and Black people are experiencing. So this is something that we are strongly advocating for. I think something also really important is that we see a lot of white people in Europe and a lot of media covering the issue of racism and Islamophobia as if it's like just happened like 2 months ago. And we've been like working against it. We've been like honestly struggling against it. I'm not saying that my struggle were the worst, but I grew up in a ghetto. So just in a French ghetto. So just that helped me like honestly I experienced like so much racism, and just to be like right now a director of a network working in the EU bubble is still every day a challenge. And when I see how people are reacting to racism and to how the struggle is real for Black people, it sometimes annoys me a lot, because I'm like, don't do it as if you didn't know that it existed. The struggle is here. We're talking about slavery, colonization. We're talking about the fact that Black people die every day in the streets. So we shouldn't be like just oversharing. And the risk now that is happening in Europe, and I'm sure everywhere, is that we're entering slowly in this performative activism. You have people just sharing on social media things like Black Lives Matter, but we all know that in the private life they're super racist. And it became like a trend. And people are just sharing and they're not educating themselves. So we're here to just remind them what it means to be against racism in Europe right now. So we know that we have instrumentalization of racism right now, which is an issue itself, because we see all these big feminist organizations being in these very scandals and controversial situations. And this is great that right now you're acknowledging that racism exists, but you have to prove that within your organizations, you have Black people, you have people of colors, you have people with disabilities, LGBTQI+ communities. This is something that is really part of the intersectional movement that we're trying to build here in Europe. And also we're trying not to fall into tokenism, because tokenistic approach are an issue. And in Europe, it's something very important to be working on. We have the diversity hiring card. You have people saying, oh, but no, it's fine, we have ISMA. Or, like people just saying, no, but I have a Black friend. And it is racist. It is 100% racist. And when you tell to people that this is racist, they feel offended. And this is part of the work every day, to just keep reminding them what is racism. And this is exhausting. And we can see how Philomena is exhausted. And we have to support each other. And I loved what Mina said, that we cannot be free if Black people are not free. And all the underrepresented communities and minorities in Europe need also our support. Like I'm speaking about the Roma community in Europe and also the Muslim community in Europe, who are facing who have been specifically targeted by laws and by governments to really restrain their freedom and liberty. And also one of the question is what would be our best suggestion to see a change in the society. I think for me and for us, it's important to understand intersectionality before campaigning, because a lot of campaigns that have been built and created by feminist organizations and by so-called feminist activists target only white women. And when you're a person with the diversity, with multiple identities, you're not feeling connected to these campaigns. And that's what's happening in Europe. White feminism is normal, and white feminists, you have white women who have as much power as white men, and we're working on this against it, because we need to change it, because underrepresented minorities and communities need our support, and we need our voices to be heard. So just to finish, for me, what is the best way to fight for racial justice and to fight for a better world would be like this very super long sentence, but I'm happy to share it. So for me, really, what is essential for this movement is to have an intersectional approach, focused also on including Black and people of colors, but also people coming from specific minorities such as LGBTQI+, disabled, but also young people. We're the key. We're the next generation. Our voices matter, and we want to be heard. And this is not possible to build a society or to fight against to fight against a society when we're not being involved. So of course, when you're a feminist, you say that you live in a sexist and a patriarchal society. So now we have to acknowledge that we live in racist societies, in societies that discriminate and stigmatize Black and people of colors. And thank you so much. So I kept it short because I was asked to, but it was really lovely to hear from you. And honestly, Philomena, keep your work. May, that was amazing. And Mina as well. I really loved what you said. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Isma, so much. I'll now invite Nikita to share also a little bit about Europe and what's happening in that context as well. Over to you, Nikita.
I'm an analyst at an international development consultancy firm. I live in the UK, and my identity is that I am British, Kenyan, Indian. So I have different identities intersecting within me. So just to quickly give you a recap of what's happening in the UK. So we've been seeing a lot of especially social media activism. We've been seeing loads of protests, loads of young people getting out onto the streets and sharing their ideas, you know, fighting for this cause, and it's really, really inspiring. We've been seeing loads of different networks of especially Black and ethnic minority people of color, people coming together and like creating new networks to host support on different platforms, including LinkedIn. A lot has been happening, especially on Instagram and Twitter, and everyone, you know, doing their part to be an activist in the spaces that they can when they can't get out into the streets to actually protest. The part that I actually want to focus on today in the few minutes that I have is actually how do we move from performative activism towards transformational, meaningful change that is long-lasting and sustainable. And I think I've done some thinking around this, and I've been speaking to loads of people about this as well. And it's all great. You know, we need to capitalize on this moment, because everyone creating different movements and really fighting for this cause. But it can't stop there. It can't just be performative. Activism cannot just be performative. You can't just like a tweet. You can't just share a post on Instagram and be done with it. It can't end there. And you know, for the people that are trying to figure out ways to continue this momentum, first of all, we need to recognize that actually this moment in time isn't just a snapshot. That these movements have been happening for decades, for years. People have been suffering and they've been subjugated. People have been living in trauma. These are real life experiences that haven't just happened all of a sudden, you know. They're deeply rooted in colonial histories, deeply, deeply rooted. White supremacy is not a new concept. It hasn't just appeared overnight. And I think when we're engaging, we need to ask the questions of actually, you know, when you're engaging in these things, who are you doing this for? Is it for yourself? Is it for the optics? Is it for your community? These are really important questions to ask, because it makes you think, okay, where does my motivation to engage actually stem from? And then we need to think about actually, how does it make me feel? Does it make me feel anything? Do I feel nothing? If so, then really we need to start looking at your privilege. If you feel good and you think this is a moment of altruism for you, then that's, you know, it's partway there, but not really, because your motivation to continue is really going to fall. If you feel empowered, then maybe your motivation to continue with the movement will last a little bit longer. If you're speaking from a place of trauma or truth or your lived experience, you know that the fight isn't just a fight that you can switch on and switch off. This is your lived experience. If you're feeling hopeful from this, then you have to think, okay, maybe some change can happen, but now I need to find a way to do this sustainably. And I'm saying this to make you think, you know, why is it actually important? Because we need to recognize how we feel in these moments. We need to understand if we're going to be overwhelmed, if we're going to, you know, feel the effects and feel that emotional burden, feel the emotional burnout that comes with it as well. Because walking towards transformational change is a marathon, it's not a sprint. So we have to find ways in which that we can rest and recover and, you know, play the long game. And again, I say this because moving from the top level of performative activism towards meaningful change means that we're actually fighting for something more than that is just, you know, going to get us likes and retweets. It's about fighting for structural, institutional, interpersonal change. There are lived experiences that get subjugated and people get discriminated in places of work when it's not overt racism, but it's about your ability to work your way up in an organization, the amount of pay that you're getting, the fall of responsibility, the lack of opportunities, the lack of access. There are so many more layers to this. So when we start to break it down and we think, okay, I'm starting a performative activism, how do I get to change? We need to think about entering into the space of learning, and there need to be different groups. So, you know, we've heard from some wonderful speakers already that actually it shouldn't be like, if you've got questions about what you should be doing, don't ask your one Black friend that you have. Like, open up your circle, you know, find people that are on the same movement, like same journey as you of unlearning. Figure out which spaces you need to be part of. There needs to be spaces, you know, for white people only, so you can actually do unlearning. Think about what you're, you know, going through. There are going to be emotions that you feel with it. Yes, you're going to face, you know, guilt. You're going to face the sadness of realizing, okay, this is the privilege that I have, and now what do I do with it? But that's not for a Black woman or an Indigenous person or people of color to sit here and say, actually, you know what, it's all right, it's fine, you know. No, find your support groups, figure it out. If you're a person of color, so for me, I'm a South Asian woman, it's not for me to look outwards into other groups. It's actually, I need to look inwards and actually talk about the level of privilege that my community has benefited from. Yes, we have a massive history of oppression, but we also have a history of repressing. We have a history of being subcolonizers, and we don't know about that. These histories have been erased over so many periods of time, and it's been done to make sure that we don't talk about colonialism, we don't talk about the effects, and we don't talk about why there are differences in the status quo. And we need to start acknowledging that we all benefit in some way. Sorry, not all of us, we don't all benefit, but we have different levels of privilege, and we need to recognize that. So whether it's, you know, being a person of color and being able to get access, you know, we have this idea of being the model minority, and that means that, you know, we still do get certain opportunities that other people don't. We need to start challenging that. If you are in a position where you can say something, you know, if you're in your place of work, then, you know, make sure you say what you can say, make sure you can do what you can do, and educate yourself. A big part of being in this learning space, you know, is about decolonizing the mind and the body. Part of it is acknowledging that, you know, the histories that have already, that we know, they're the histories of the victors. They've been put into place to celebrate the successes of Great Britain, but actually there's a deep history of empire. And if you're a person of color, you know this all too well. Your lived experiences tell you this. And so something that I do to try and, you know, bring this to light is use spoken word poetry as a tool against colonial practices. And I do that so, you know, we can go on to these journeys of self-discovery and understanding what our identities actually are, understanding that we have different identities that intersect, and actually as a person of color, my history, my identity is linked to the history and identity of a white person, the same way that it's linked to somebody who's Indigenous or a Black person. Our histories may not be the same, our experiences are not the same, but they are interwoven, and we need to start recognizing our positionality in these spaces. And it's really important that we start delinking from colonial practices and moving forward. The final thing I just want to say about transformational change and, you know, what the youth can do, and especially if you're, you know, in feminist leadership positions, is understand that transformational change isn't just going to happen. You need two really key points. You need accountability and commitment. So you can't just say, okay, we're going to work towards change and that's fine. No, you have to make a commitment to it. This is not something that's going to end in 5 minutes, in a week, a day. It will not blow over. We need equity. It's not just about equality. And for that, we need commitment to ensuring that change carries on. But we also need accountability. We need to hold people accountable to what they're saying. So if you're an organization that has put out a statement saying we support, we're going to do this, we're going to do that, fine. Understand that you will be held accountable. And, you know, us in the movements, we need to hold not just organizations, but individuals accountable as well. I'm not saying that we need to promote cancel culture, but we need to promote this idea of unlearning. We need to learn again, and then we need to grow. then we need to go back and learn some more. We need to share. We need to be in spaces that we can share together and continuously work towards transformational change, because alone we're not going to be able to do it. Central to that idea is intersectionality. So we can't just be doing this in our individual bubbles. We need to ensure that we're not maintaining the status quo. And by doing that is by taking an intersectional feminist approach. It is by taking a decolonial approach. It is by fighting for anti-racism. So it's not enough to just say, I'm not a racist, or it's not enough to say, you know, I have this person in my circle, I have this person in my circle. No, we need to fight for anti-racism. We need to fight for racial justice. And we need to do it in a sustainable, long-term way. We need to take the pressure off the people that face this and live this on a single day, every single day. And we need to really promote spaces where we're promoting healing and rest and recovery for those that need it the most. I'm going to stop there, but thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Nikita, and to Isma, both of you, for really sharing from the heart, and also sharing really practical tips and approaches and methods that youth can take in approaching this movement. So thank you so much. I'd like to invite Jose to speak a little bit about what's happening in South America. After him, we'll have Rahaf speaking on behalf of the Arab region, and then we'll open it up to others on the call who would like to share what's happening in their parts of the world, and just any reflections on these questions that are here up on the slide. So over to you, Jose.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone. It's been really powerful just to listen to all of the perspectives and points of view. It's a very enriching experience. When it comes to talk about racial justice, I think it is expected to have different points of view and different opinions, and with more reason when we are doing it in multicultural environments, just as we are doing it today. To me, it has been very enriching to learn how each country and each region have their own conceptions and perspectives on racial justice. This is, of course, something completely understandable because of the diversity of variables and conditions of each country, such as the population, migration history, cultural background, etc. So when we are having this multicultural conversation, we expect to have different points of view and different opinions on how are we addressing the racism topic in our countries. So I would like to start talking a bit about what's going on in Mexico and how are we addressing this conversation. I think it's a very huge responsibility just to talk about a whole region, for example, Latin America or Caribbean, right? Because even if we as a region may have very similar things or may be addressing the conversation in a similar way, the truth is that we have differences. We have political context, we have different demographic contexts, which is not exactly the same. So I will be speaking from my perspective of Mexico. The reality is that we are not really having this conversation in Mexico. We are not fully aware of how are we being racist in our own context or in our own environments. And I'm gonna say why. In my personal opinion, it all starts with our identity. A few years ago, Mexican population was divided into three main groups. Just to have this idea, the indigenous people, the Europeans or the white people, and mestizos, which is a mixed race. So this methodology of dividing people in these groups was leaving behind numerous ethnic groups that exist in our country, such as the African American population. This group is a very great example of other groups that has been invisible or not recognized for the big majority. This is also an important topic to see how we are addressing racism. Like, for example, many people think that a few years ago, many people thought and still think that there isn't an Afro-Mexican population, that there are no Black people here. So therefore, there is no racism in our society. I mean, it's like there is no presence of this group, there is no presence of an African population in Mexico, there is no presence of Black people in Mexico, so we think that there is no racism in this country. Maybe because we are used to see the movies or the news or whatever. So there is this thought that racism is only to this kind of groups, you know, like Afro descendants or Black people. So number one, there is a presence of African descendants in Mexico. And number two, we are racist not only to African descendants, but to many other groups in the country. The truth is that racism and discrimination can be exercised to several groups of people, and not only to one specific group. Here in Mexico, it's sad to say, but we are racist, we are classist, we discriminate, and we have this implicit bias very inside of us. So to give a better understanding of our perspectives on racial justice here in Mexico, I would like to highlight 3 points that appear in a research conducted by Oxfam. This research is called "Through My Race, Inequality Will Speak." Just as a cultural note, this is an allusion to the National Autonomous University of Mexico motto, which is "Through my race, the spirit will speak." And I am very familiar to this because I went to that university. So, okay, these 3 points I would like to talk about is the linguistic belonging, which is in Mexico, 7 million people speak indigenous dialect. That is 6.5% of our population. Number 2 is the self-enrollment or the self-recognition. How do we identify in several groups of people or ethnicity? And number 3 is the physical identification based on skin tone. So these 3 ethnic racial elements help us to understand the association between ethnicity, race, and equality. And wait, this is as this way to classify people, we will have a real impact on how they are treated. Of course, this goes in function or in line with the range of intergenerational opportunities that people have, and maybe I will explain this a little bit later. With these points, intersectionality comes up. Just to bring up an example, for men, the probability of reaching higher education is 35% lower for those who speak indigenous languages. But when we see this from women, for women, this probability of reaching higher education is 73% lower compared to 35% of the men. On the other hand, the economic dimension in which ethnical racial characteristics have higher effects for women than men when it comes to access to wealth. It's very much probable that an indigenous men can access to different range of wealth, higher range of wealth than women who speak indigenous languages or who are African descendants or whatever. So I just wanted to highlight these kind of points. I would really like to say that here in Mexico, and I think in most of the countries, we are in this learning process. We are figuring out how to start this conversation. I mean, when I say we are not having it at all, I want to say, yes, we are having it. We are having these movements led by youth or by some institutions talking about anti-racism and how are we addressing it in Mexico, but it's not enough. I think we need to encourage our leaders and our authorities to mainstream public policies. And here I would like to, for example, here in Mexico, gender violence is a very obvious issue. So in the United States, the conversation about anti-racism started many, many years ago. But in Mexico, for example, the gender violence conversation started a few years ago, but it was like so often companies, organizations, authorities realized that they needed to address this topic. So right now, companies, organizations have aligned their policies to gender policies. I think that's pretty much a bit what has happened in the US. As this conversation started many years ago, companies, organizations, politics have been aligned. I know there's work to do, but they already started to align to anti-racism policies. I think that's what we need in Mexico. And another thing is just to really invite our people, invite our circle, just to be on the conversation. For me, it's really sad to, when we are talking about racism, maybe just have a group only of the groups that are being, aggressed or something. It's like when we do masculinity workshops, it's really bad just to see women attending masculinity workshops when it should be men. So what I'm trying to say is, when we have this kind of conversation, just invite the people that can be allies or whatever, and invite them just to that levels of not only performative activism, but to coalition. And well, I think that's pretty much what I have to say for now.
Thank you so much, Jose. Yeah, it's so interesting to hear kind of the dynamics of each of our regions. This is really wonderful. I'd now like to invite Rahaf to speak about the Arab region.
Hi everyone. Okay, so I'm making sure that you hear me. I'm speaking from Beirut, Lebanon, and I want to talk about the racism that has been here for years, still with this like zero care from society or even on the policy level. So at least here in Lebanon, when we talk about racism, we don't talk just about racism against Black people. We talk about racism against Black people, against the Syrian refugees, against Palestinian refugees as well. And this racism has been very systematic, whether in laws, whether in practice, whether from the society, whether in the houses, in schools, and everywhere. So, for example, we have laws that exclude Palestinians clearly and doesn't allow them to actually practice like so many jobs in Lebanon. And we make sure that Palestinians that have been here for more than 50, 60, 70 years, they still live in camps, in the camps that have zero, like not even the basic conditions for decent life. We also talk about Syrian refugees that have been under massive attacks from the media and from the Lebanese society over the past 10 years. That we also make sure that the Syrian refugees are also staying in camps, that they are staying in tents, that they have zero rights, that they have zero protection as well. And still the state has been practicing a very racist discourse against them, putting the blame of all the economic situation on Syrian refugees, and making sure that the racist discourse is being used to actually blame them and to advocate for the deportation as well. So there has been like forced deportation for Syrian refugees. And we have also racism against Black people in Lebanon, whether against Black Lebanese people or whether against migrant workers and migrant domestic workers and whatever falls in between. So we have racism against children that are facing bullying in schools, children that are only 7 and 8 years old who go back to their families and they tell them that I want to use acid on my skin so I become white, and so people just can talk to me. I'm also talking about people who have zero access to healthcare. They're not even considered as workers because racism against Black people has been legalized through what we call a sponsorship system. So the sponsorship system is basically a system that makes that categorizes migrant workers based on their nationality. So a migrant, so for example, someone coming from Europe to work in Lebanon is considered higher class than someone who's coming from, for example, from South Africa to work in Lebanon. So we have different categories of migrant workers, and migrant workers coming from Asian countries and from African countries are what we call the lowest category, and hence they have a sponsor, like a Lebanese sponsor, that is basically their employer, that has full power over their residency in Lebanon, over their legal papers, over their movement, and even over their freedom. So we're talking about 300,000 migrant workers and migrant domestic workers in Lebanon who are actually under this legalized slavery system. where we have migrant domestic workers living and working in houses for 24 hours a day, with no, minimal access to food, with no days off, with zero protection from labor law, because even the labor law in Lebanon does not consider them as workers. So we're talking about domestic workers that we don't even see them as workers, and they're not worker protection. They cannot even unionize. So this is another layer of problem. So even when migrant communities want to organize, they organize being afraid on their life, and being afraid of actually being caught by the police, and then hence forced to be deported directly. If I want to talk about the sponsorship system, it will take me at least 5 hours to really describe how abusive and racist the system is, because it's not even a law, it's a system that has been a practice, like it's forced by practice and by different laws and by different articles, and for years for purely economic reasons, because we want to make sure that we have a migrant working force in Lebanon, because we want to maximize the profits while making sure that we pay the lowest that we can. So we pay them like around $1 per hour, even less. So we're talking about a whole system in Lebanon against Black people and against migrant workers and migrant domestic workers. So what has been very very frustrating, at least for me and for many people here, is when the massive protests have started in the US, many people here were like sharing the hashtag of Black Lives Matter, and we were so shocked and we're like, where were you when like Black Lives Matter don't just matter in the US, they do matter more also in Lebanon. So if you really want to show your solidarity to what's happening in the US, you need to show your solidarity in the first place to what's happening here in the country, and to really stop the sponsorship system, and to really fight for domestic workers who are committing suicide. So in Lebanon, we have a rate of two migrant domestic workers committing suicide every single week. And these are only the number that we are getting through media. We know there are much higher numbers in closed doors, because we really don't have access to people who live in the houses. We have zero access to what they're going through. They're facing a lot of psychological, of abuse, physical abuse, sexual abuse. They have a lot of labor violations, so not even protected by a labor law. And still, we cannot just say that, okay, I'm gonna turn my back to all like hundreds thousands of people in Lebanon against, and turn my back to Palestinians and to all the Syrians, and actually say Black Lives Matter only in the US. No, Black Lives Matter everywhere. Black Lives Matter even here in Lebanon, in Beirut, starting from your house, from your neighborhood. And this is what we have been trying to work on. And not to mention that also in Lebanon specifically, we had a revolution for the past like 8 months. And also there have been like a very worsening economic situation. And we had also the corona crisis. So everyone was affected by the crisis of corona and of the economic collapse. But the first people who were affected by this are the marginalized communities, speaking on Syrian refugees, Palestinian, and on migrant workers. And still, when the state was doing initiatives and paying like an amount of money to support people, they were only paying it to Lebanese people, and they were not giving any kind of support, not even food relief for Syrian or for non-Lebanese people. There have been even like raises from Lebanese initiatives who are collecting donations, and when we were contacting them for migrant workers, they were saying, no, actually, we only help Lebanese people, as if like only Lebanese people start, like migrant workers don't start. It's really frustrating when we see that even like Lebanon after the civil war, it was fully built by migrant workers and by Syrian refugees. And still, when we see that really the country can stop functioning if all migrant workers decide to do a strike, literally the Lebanon collapses, and yet we really see that we don't look at migrant workers as lives, we just look to them as numbers. So there's a lot of work that needs to be done here in Lebanon. Not to mention also right now there's like there have been like international attention to Lebanon, because also Lebanese employers who have live-in domestic workers, they have been actually throwing migrant domestic workers in front of their embassies. So for example, if I have a domestic worker, I haven't been paying her for months, I cannot afford to pay her right now because I don't have access to my money, and because the economic situation is bad. then what I will do is that I will go throw her on the street, send her by taxi to her embassy, and she will sleep on the street and let someone return her back to her country. And we're talking about hundreds of people that are being thrown out for the past 2 weeks. So we're talking about insane numbers that we do know that it's going to be increasing. Still, with the labor, with the Ministry of Labor doing zero actions to actually protect and to actually force employers to pay salaries at least or pay tickets for migrant workers. So how do we support? I know like we've been talking about intersectional feminist approach and about, but I think it's important for me to really think how we can implement a feminist approach, how we can implement an intersectional feminist approach. Um, so I think this is why here in Lebanon we've been trying to really make sure that talking about the sponsorship system and talking about racism has been at the heart of the revolution. So we've seen feminist groups going down to the street and making sure that we're talking about these issues, not just about like if we're doing a revolution, then we're doing the revolution for all workers, not just for Lebanese workers. And this is what we've been trying to do. How to apply this approach is also to stop victimizing migrant workers in Lebanon. At least I'm talking again about Lebanon. We cannot keep looking at migrant workers as victims and as people that we need to be speaking on their behalf, which has been very problematic as well. We need to really work in solidarity with these groups. So we need to see there are like a lot of community groups that are trying to organize. So we sit together and we try to organize a movement, like a really feminist, anti-racist movement. Um, and how we build it together, because a change in Lebanon cannot be of me speaking on behalf of someone or me leading a movement. If any change is going to happen, it's going to be either led by migrant workers or it's going to be led by migrant workers and Lebanese people. So this will be my intervention. Thank you so much. I'm going to have to go. But yeah, that's it.
Thank you so
And
much,
check
Rahab.
anti-racism movement on Facebook to really check the kind of work that we're doing right now as well. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Thank you for sharing what's going on in your region. So we have a few minutes left on the call, and we would like to open it up now for anyone else who would like to speak, share some responses to these questions, or pose additional questions for the conversation. We will wrap up at 3 o'clock, so we have about 15 minutes. So we'll encourage everyone to keep your interventions now quite short so that we can hear from as many of us as possible. If you would like to speak, there is a little raise hand function. If you click on the participants tab and raise your little blue hand, we'll know that you're in line to speak. And really just kind of thank you all so much for participating and sharing some of your thoughts. So I see Ria has a hand up. We'll turn to you.
Hi everyone, I'm Rhea. I'm from India and I'm 19 years old. So I just wanted to talk to everyone who spoke today and tell them that it was a really educational session, one, and that we definitely need more talks like that to educate a lot more people around the world. I generally wanted to talk about a couple of things currently happening in India for the past, couple of months, including the Black Lives Matter movement. One of them being that I have seen a lot of participation and activism on social media, but it limits just to sharing posts and things like that, not actually, signing petitions, donations, things like that. There's not, it isn't real activism. So there's something I have been trying to deal with when it comes to teenagers around me and teenagers around on Instagram and Twitter and things like that, and try to explain to them how they can do a better job. But at the same time, I don't want to be telling them how to do a better job. I want them to follow Black people and let them hear it from themselves. And one of the major things that I don't know how to tackle would be in India, there is an issue among a lot of teenagers where they think they are allowed to use the N-word as if it's something, it's just a word that they can use. And I've had many issues try to explain to them why they aren't allowed to use that word. It is not their word. So one of the main questions I actually had for any of the panelists who could answer this for me is, how do you explain to another person of color to just stop being so ignorant? And it's just basically not your word to use. That's one problem that I wanted to share. And second, another thing I would like to point out is that we really need to implement better educational systems when it comes to sharing our history, because recently I found out that India has an African community that has been living in India for the past 600 years. And we have a major caste problem. There is, it's called casteism basically, and where we discriminate on the basis of caste. And when this African community had migrated to India, they were brought in actually as slaves 600 years ago. They're called the Siddhi community. And we have about 70,000 to 80,000 Siddhis living in India at the moment. And they are treated as even lower than what the lowest caste is at currently. Only, I think in 2003, were they given the same rights as scheduled castes and tribes in India. And only then were they even allowed higher education. And what baffles me is that I didn't know this until about 5 days ago. And nobody else in the community has ever read about them, even though we have a really big community of them living in India. So I just wanted to share my thoughts about how education is very imperative, and especially when when we're young, where we learn about the caste system in our history books, but we don't learn about so many other communities, including the Siddhi community, that is currently being mistreated. So yeah, that's all I had to share. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Raya. So maybe we can take a couple of comments, and then if the panelists would like to respond to some of the questions or thoughts that are shared, we can have a little bit of time towards the end, but we don't have so much time. I'll hand over to Margaret, who also has her hand up.
Hi, everyone, and thank you so much. I really appreciate the panel discussion and what beautiful people all of you are. I'm speaking as an older person who's grown up all over the world. Out here in California, the Black Lives Matter has brought a lot of different people in this global fight for justice for all. I question sometimes the violence, the burning, and I've sometimes wished for a Martin Luther King or a Mahatma Gandhi, someone who can lead us all with a nonviolent spiritual point of view. And that would be my main concern, is that everyone who is in this global movement for recognizing oppression and stopping it for people based on skin color, also capitalism and what it's brought about with so many people suffering, is that we join our forces. There must be at least 7 billion of us because the leaders are a small percentage. We join our forces for the good for everyone. And that's my hope, is that we really keep that at the forefront. We are coming into a new time. Let's make it a beautiful time for everybody on earth. Let's really take care of our children, our women, our people, share the wealth, and let's be nonviolent in every way. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Margaret. So I don't see any more hands up. So maybe I'll turn over to our panelists and our speakers. If you'd like to respond to any of the questions or any of these thoughts. Go ahead, Philomena.
In regards to like nonviolence, because I'm not a violent person and I don't condone violence or advocate for it. But in regards to the looting and that, and me being a person that was on the grounds like the first day it ever happened, I completely understand it because nothing really started being talked about. Like many of us have said, these movements have been a thing for years. They have been around. But these conversations that needed to be had and the seriousness that needed to be put into these conversations was not being had until things started getting looted. And here's the thing with the people that do loot, because I've had these conversations trying to understand what's really behind it. And it's because people are angry and they've expressed that anger in the right legal way for so long and they were not heard. So they were tired and they reacted with emotion and they went out and they destroyed these places, because a lot of these places are owned by people we will never see, but are in the pockets of people that control and make decisions for this country. And that's just the system that we go through. So when people are looting and rioting, there are people out there that are just counterproductive and are just kind of think it's a thing and just want to be out there causing mayhem. But there are people who, this is how they express their rage. The way I express my activism in speaking in panels and having sit-ins and marches and things like that, that's how I do it. But for them, it is taking money out of these companies that are literally at the top of perpetuating racism. Racism is systemic. Everything ties into each other. So there is no really disassociating it. And I feel for those people that these are the businesses that they've had and they have nothing to do with any of these corporate people and their sentiments. But unfortunately, when it comes to this fight, we can't separate things. Everything is connected. And I wanted to read this quote because I asked the same thing, and when I read this quote, it told me everything, because everyone talks about Martin Luther King and how like this generation doesn't really have one main leader, and we all kind of have different groups that are all working together to do that. But for me, you know, I think that people romanticize Dr. King and don't really dissect him, because when you talk about Dr. King and you talk about all of that, he's not the reason why we have our rights that we barely have. He was an advocate, and the reason why he was placed on the mantle was because he was asking for our rights the way the white man felt we should ask for our rights, which is peacefully, which is talking to them and sitting down having conversations with them. And there was nothing wrong with that, because there's a lot of things about his methodology that I even look at myself. But then there was also people like Malcolm X. And although Malcolm X, you can say he put people in harm's way, he was tactical. Black Panthers were tactical, because we understood that when you are already a group of people that have nothing to protect you, we didn't even have laws to recognize us as human beings. So you do have to protect yourself. If you need to be violent and protect yourself, you have to. Violence protected a lot of the communities. Black Panthers, there were communities where people, KKKs, couldn't go into because they knew that these communities were armed. So although we want to, in a perfect world, not be violent, you cannot battle something that is this violent and not protect yourself. It's easy to say that, and I think it's not to attack you at all as my ally, but it is to say even that idea of this fight being able to be nonviolent is part of your privilege as a white woman. Because when I think about this and I think about this conversation and this anger, I can't even think of it being peaceful, because there is no peace already. There's no peace that exists for us as Black people in this fight, because we live with this every single day. So for me, nonviolence isn't a thing, because in order for this movement to be nonviolent, it would mean my oppressor would have to not engage in violence as well. And they aren't. So I just wanted to close it off and read this one quote, because it's really like one of my favorite quotes by Stokely Carmichael. And it states, Dr. King's policies was that nonviolence would achieve the gains for Black people in the United States. His major assumption was that if you are nonviolent, if you suffer, if your opponent will see your suffering and will be moved to change his heart. That's very good. He only made one fallacious assumption, In order for nonviolence to work, your opponent must have a conscience. The United States has none. Has none. They have no conscience. They see our people get slaughtered every single day. It does not move them. Thousands and thousands and thousands of people. They don't even have a conscience. And I know they don't have a conscience because if they had a conscience, they would at least have a database that has police officers that have been marked off before, that have had offenses. But they don't even do that. Even the bare minimum of decency or to even pretend like they care about us is not even there. And as much as I can't stand Donald Trump, I'm so glad he became president because he took the mask off this country and showed what it really was. That our leader, their leader, not my president, but their leader was someone that is openly states that his parents were KKK members, has photos up, encourages white supremacy, calls Hispanics rapists, wants to build a border, puts a travel ban with no sense of thinking or logistics or anything. But that is the essence of America. White supremacy and white men being at the seat of the table and making decisions about us, about people they could never even understand and don't even view as human beings. Trump captured the essence of what America is perfectly. So as much as you may hate Trump as an individual, you have to realize that in some way he was used to incite a real conversation. Because it wasn't just George Floyd, it was George Floyd and it was Black people already on the tip of the edge with Trump being voted in. And when you look at America, you look at America as a systemic system because what they did was they voted in a Black president, didn't really allow him to have any power. And let's make it clear, Obama would have never won as a president if he was fully Black. Let's put that out there. Had to realize that as well. And then right afterwards, that sense of hope that Obama provided, and they saw it, and the numbers of Black people and statistics and education and growing. Black people are the most educated women in this country. That hope that Obama provided, coming a Black man, Harvard, president, Michelle, no scandals, hope. Everything that you could never think Black people to be, Obama embodied. And that hope was everything for us. And they saw that, and they saw the need and the want for change in our communities, and that's exactly why they made sure Trump won, to dead it, to dead any type of hope we had. So everything is very psychological. So people, when you think about politics and you just think about everything that is happening, everything is tactical to me. Trump was voted in on purpose to silence Black people, to humble us, to remind us our place in this nation. And in counteract, they didn't think that, hey, these people are finally going to say enough is enough, and they're going to uproar, and they're going to decide that we're going to put money into our families, we're going to put money into our businesses. We don't need y'all. We never have needed y'all. We were just in a system that made us have to need you in order to even survive. And we're saying no to that. So I completely, I always root for nonviolence in this type of environment, and I don't want people to just be getting hurt senselessly. But I don't ever think that these type of movements and revolutions will ever occur without violence, because you can only stay oppressed for so long. And thank you so much, Margaret, for your input and your insight. Thank you so much. Thank you. It's just something that's been coming up a lot with a lot of people, especially like the older generation. So I wanted to speak on behalf of the young people and explain, where that's coming from the outside looking in. You don't really know, you just see writing. So I wanted to explain where it was coming from and kind of just create that bridge for us so you could understand.
Thank you so much. So we're right on 3 p.m. And Saida is going to do a quick summary to close us out. But I really wanted to acknowledge those who now have their hands up and who have mentioned in the chat that they would like to speak. This conversation really, once we get going, there's so much to say and so much to share, especially when we take it from a global level and all the nuance of race that plays out in all of our different contexts. So maybe this could be thought for a future conversation, and we continue these conversations somehow online or in your own social spheres. But really just wanted to say thank you to all of you for sharing your thoughts, posing such thoughtful questions, and hopefully this can be the beginning of an ongoing conversation that we can have together. So I'll hand over to Saida to close us out.
Thank you, Safira, and thank you again, everyone. We started the Youth Speak Out series to engage young people in the Beijing 25 and generation equality process and to facilitate meaningful youth-centered discussions on pressing issues of our time. And we started the series first with our event on the emerging realities around COVID, and now how young people are leading global movements for racial justice. And it feels like we are at the cusp of a global shift, and young people and feminists around the world are leading these movements. And we find ourselves in a new reality, in a new world. And our goal as the Young Professionals Network is to keep hosting these spaces and to keep bringing together these global youth voices. So again, thank you for joining us today. And we will also be sharing a feedback survey with you all to help us understand how we can shape these events and convenings in the future and what we can do better. So please feel free to provide your feedback. And thank you again to all our panelists, to our speakers and our participants for an incredibly powerful discussion. And before we log off and wrap up an intense and moving discussion, maybe we can quickly open our videos and just have a human moment together as we virtually say hello to each other from around the world and just express our gratitude for having the opportunity to learn and be allies. So, hello everyone. Thank you for being here. Thank you for joining us today. It's so great to see you all on the call. And it's so many new faces from around the world. We're so happy you could join us. Please do take that feedback survey so we can learn how to do better, how to be better. And again, so wonderful to see everyone's faces. And just thank you for being here from the bottom of our hearts. Thank you.
Thank you, Sophia.
Thank you for everybody's energy. Thank you.
Thank you, Philomena, for president.
Thank you. Thank you. So inspiring.
Thank Diana. Thank you all.
Thank you, Afira, Philomena,